Hester Whittle married Lemuel Crandall on a cold December morning in the front parlor of his big empty ranch house in the Two Bears country, with the parson and a single witness and the bridegroom himself sitting wrapped in a heavy quilt in his chair because he was too weak to stand. And not one word of love or affection passed between the bride and the groom from the moment they were introduced to the moment the ring was on her finger. The bargain was perfectly understood by both. She was a destitute widow with nowhere to go, and he was a bitter, dying man with nobody to leave his fine ranch to. And the doctor in Two Bears Junction had given him 3 months at the most. She would marry him, nurse him to the grave, and inherit the ranch as his lawful widow when the thing was done. And that, both had said plainly across the kitchen table the week before, was the whole of the arrangement, with no pretense on either side. Neither expected Lemuel Crandall to see the spring, and of the two of them, the one who expected it least of all, and if she was being honest, wanted it least of all, was his new bride. To understand the strange thing that the next 6 months made of those two people, you have to understand the kind of people they had been before they came to that cold parlor. Lemuel Crandall, Lem to the few who'd known him long enough, had built the finest ranch in the Two Bears country with his own two hands. He'd come into that country a young man 40 years before, with nothing but a horse and a saddle and a fixed determination. And through 40 years of brutal work, he had made of his place the kind of spread other ranchers pointed to and envied. He had married, in his middle years, a soft-spoken woman named Cora, who had died in childbirth in their 5th year. He had raised the one son who came along later, a child by a second brief marriage that did not last. Son Lem's only living blood had ridden off after a hard argument when he was 19 and had not in the 15 years since written so much as a single line back to his father. The years of grief and solitude had turned what had been a hard man at the start into a sour and unsmiling one by the end. By the time the wasting illness took hold of him in his 62nd year, the doctor called it a failing of the heart and the lungs together. Slow but certain, Lemuel Crandall was a man who had stopped expecting anything good from the world and had stopped, as well, offering it anything good in return. He was angry that he was sick. He was angrier still that he had nobody to leave the fine ranch to, and that everything he had built was going to fall into the hands of his bank or strangers when he was in his grave. It was that last fury, more than anything, that drove him at last to write out his strange short notice and tack it up at the post office in Two Bears Junction. Widower of 62, terminal illness, modest ranch property, seeks woman of decent character to marry and inherit on his death. Honest, plain arrangement. Apply at the Crandall place. It was a queer enough notice that the whole valley talked about it for a month, and a number of curious women came to look him over and went away again without applying. For sick or no, Lemuel Crandall was a difficult man to spend 3 months in a room with, and most went away convinced that no inheritance was worth the price. Only one woman came to his door and took him at his bitter word, Hester Whittle. Hester was 55 years old that winter, the widow of a small farmer named Tom Whittle, who had died 2 years before and left her with debts she could not pay. The farm had been foreclosed, the household sold off for what it would bring, and Hester had found herself a widow alone with no living family, no place to go, and very little but her own 2 strong hands and her own hard sense. She had taken what work she could, domestic work mostly, in the kitchens of other women's houses, and had been making a thin, precarious living that way for the better part of a year when she had seen the queer little notice at the post office in Two Bears Junction. She had read it twice in the cold and done the simple arithmetic of her situation. A widower of 62, dying, 3 months at most. A modest ranch said to be one of the finer spreads in the country, to be inherited at his death. A short, hard piece of nursing in exchange for the security of her remaining years. It was not, Hester told herself, a thing to be ashamed of. The man had advertised the arrangement himself in plain print. There was no pretense on either side. He wanted his ranch to go to a person of his choosing and was willing to marry someone for the purpose. She wanted a roof and a future and was willing to nurse a dying stranger to earn one. It was a transaction. And Hester Whittle had stopped being able to afford the luxury of sentiment a long time ago. She walked the 7 miles out to the Crandall place the next morning, sat down at his kitchen table, and looked the bitter dying man steady in the eye, and told him she had come about his notice. He looked her over hard. She was not pretty. She was not young. She was a small, plain-weathered woman of 55 with steady gray eyes and a mouth used to setting itself against hardship. He asked her what she expected to get out of it. She told him evenly, a place to live out her own remaining years, after she had done him the service he had advertised for. He asked her what nursing experience she had. She told him she had nursed her own husband to his grave and her own mother before him. and she knew the work. He asked her whether she could bear 3 months of a sour-tempered dying man. She said she could bear what she had to bear. And he looked at her a long, unflinching moment, and saw a woman whose own hardships had ground her down to the same bare honest plainness that his own had ground him to, and he found against his expectations that he did not mind the look of her. "We will be married Saturday next, then," he said. "There's a parson in town for him." They were. There was no celebration. There was the parson and a single witness, the foreman of Lem's ranch, an old hand named Pete Garner, and the briefest possible ceremony, with the bridegroom too short of breath to stand up out of his chair. Hester said the words. Lem said the words. The parson pronounced them man and wife. Pete signed as witness. The parson rode away, and Hester Whittle Crandall took off her good shawl, rolled up her sleeves, and started the hard work she had come to do. What followed was 3 months of nursing, and then, against every expectation, a fourth and a fifth and a sixth. Lemuel Crandall was a difficult patient. He was a man who had been alone with his own bitterness for too many years, and being now both ill and dependent did not improve him. He was sharp-tongued, was sometimes cruel. He made cutting remarks about her cooking and her tidying and her presence in his house. He told her, more than once, that he supposed she was counting the days until he was in the ground. He was, in short, exactly the difficult, unlovable creature that the curious women who'd come on had decided no inheritance was worth. But Hester Whittle had not come to his ranch expecting a man to be lovable. She had come to do a job, and she did it, with the same plain, unsentimental thoroughness with which she had shouldered every other hard thing her life had handed her. She bore his sharp tongue without answering it. She set down good plain food in front of him 3 times a day, proper food, beef and biscuits and broth, not the whiskey and bad coffee on which he had been half-starving himself for a year. She took down the bottle and put it in the back of the cupboard. She tended to him with the steady, skilled hand of a woman who had nursed her own, dying. She cleaned his house. She did the small, endless ranch tasks an able-bodied man could no longer do. And when he was cruel, she did not snap back. She simply went on with her work as if a sharp word from a sick old man were the wind in the chimney. And somewhere in the 2nd month, against all medical expectation, Lemuel Crandall began to mend. It was a slow thing, and the doctor from Two Bears Junction was astonished when he came out at the 8-week mark. The wasting had stopped. The color was coming back into Lem's face. His breath was no longer the rattling labor it had been. His appetite was strong. The doctor stood at the foot of the bed and shook his head and said he could not entirely account for it. Perhaps he had been mistaken in his diagnosis, or perhaps the proper food and the proper care had simply done what no medicine could. Whatever it was, he said, looking at Hester with a kind of wonder, "You have brought this man back from the brink, Mrs. Crandall. He may well live for many years yet." Lem did not speak when the doctor said it. He did not thank her. He did not look at her. He turned his face to the wall, and Hester went quietly back to her kitchen to think. She thought all that day and all the next, and she came to her conclusion with the same hard, plain practicality with which she had come to the arrangement in the first place. The bargain had been, she would nurse him to his death and inherit the ranch. The bargain was broken. He was not going to die, at least not in the 3 months the doctor had given him, and likely not for a long while yet. She had no claim on the place as long as he lived. To stay on now would be to live as his charity, and Hester Whittle had not survived the loss of her farm and the long, lean year that followed by sponging off any man, sick or well. The honest thing, the plain decent thing, was to leave. She went to her small room behind the kitchen and she began to pack. Lem found her packing late that afternoon. He had walked from his chair to the kitchen on his own legs for the first time in months, and he stood in the doorway of her small room and looked at her folding her few good shawls into her small carpet bag, and his face went a color she had not seen on it. "What are you doing, Mrs. Crandall?" he said. "The bargain was that I would nurse you until you died." "Mr. Crandall," Hester said evenly, not looking up, "and you have not died. The doctor says you'll likely live for years. The bargain is broken. I will not stay on as a charity case in a house where I have no honest claim. I'll be gone in the morning. I'll not take anything that isn't mine. The marriage you can have annulled or set aside by a lawyer in town. There are grounds, given the circumstances, and I'll sign whatever needs signing. I am sorry for the trouble, and I am very glad you are going to live." She closed the carpetbag. He did not move out of the doorway. "Hester," he said, and it was the first time she realized he had ever used her given name. "Look at me." She looked at him. He was leaning a little on the doorframe, still weak, his face newly thin from the long illness, but not any more the face of a dying man. He looked tired and old and uncertain in a way he had not let her see in 6 months. "You are not staying on as a charity case," he said. You will not be staying on a borrowed inheritance either. The bargain we made, yes. You came here expecting to bury me. Yes, you came for the ranch and not for the man. And I made that bargain because I had been alone so long I could think of no other way to leave my place to somebody who'd treat it right. We were neither of us pretending to anything finer than a transaction. You don't have to apologize for it. He looked down. But I am going to tell you a thing now, Plain, that I want you to hear before you set one foot out of that door. You came to this house to wait for me to die, and you saved my life. The doctor knows it, and so do I. You walked into the bitterest, worst-tempered house in the Two Bears country, and you didn't flinch, and you didn't complain, and you fed me decent food, and you put the whiskey away, and you bore my ugliness without ever once snapping back. And somewhere in the middle of it, the man I had been quietly dying as for years started to thaw. And I am the man standing in this doorway because of you. Whatever I do with the years that have been given me back, those years are yours as much as mine. His old voice cracked. I am not the man who placed that notice at the post office, Hester. He died, and a good thing, too. The man I am now is not bitter. He is grateful, and he is asking you please not to leave the house you saved, not as my charity, as my wife in truth. The marriage that was a transaction, I would like it to be a marriage. I would like to live the years I have left being deserving of the woman who gave them back to me. If you can find it in yourself to stay, I would count it the greatest piece of grace that has ever come to me. Hester Whittle stood with her hand on the carpetbag and could not, for a long moment, find any words. She had not come to that ranch for love. She had not come even hoping for kindness. She had come for a transaction, and she had braced herself against any softness on her own part, all 6 months long, with the iron of a woman who had learned not to let herself want. And in the middle of his speech, somewhere along the line, she had found herself wanting at last, not the ranch, which she could earn another way, but the strange, thawed, difficult, honest man who was standing in her doorway asking her, with a humility she would never have believed lived in him, please not to go. I came here, Mr. Crandall, she said carefully, expecting to bury you within the season. I came for the land. I will not pretend I came for anything else. She drew a breath. But somewhere in these 6 months, against everything I had told myself I would not let happen, I started to see that there was a man under all that bitterness who was worth saving. And the saving of him got tangled up with something I had not come here for and had not let myself want. So if you are asking me to stay as your wife in truth, and not on the bargain, which is gone, then I will tell you yes, I will stay. And I am very, very glad you are going to live. They were a long time married after that. Lem and Hester Crandall, many good years on the ranch in the Two Bears country, the bitter dying man and the practical widow who had come to bury him, both slowly remade by the unlikeliest arrangement the valley had ever seen. He became in those years a man worth the wife he had stumbled into. She found in him a love she had stopped believing she would ever know. And he would say in his old age, when he could be coaxed to tell the story, she came to this house expecting to nurse me to my grave and inherit the place. Least of all her did anyone expect me to live. And it was her steady plain decency that quietly brought me back. I had thought I was buying somebody to bury me. What I got, by the grace of God and the iron sense of one widow who would not flinch, was a woman who buried the worst of me and brought the rest of me back to life. The bitter man I was is in the ground. The man Hester made of me is the one she married. In truth, the day she said she would stay.